Hello. So this is a very short presentation on assumptions testing. As I've pointed out in the introductory presentation on project management, assumptions are an important part of project management. You know, when we start a project, we may make some assumptions about any number of things that are important to the project, and then we proceed on that basis. Whenever we don't know a whole lot about what the project is about, we have to make a lot of assumptions. You know, when we do know a lot, we don't have to make too many assumptions, but the key element here is that if an assumption proves to be wrong, it may in fact it would certainly affect significantly the project. It may in fact lead us to terminating a project. But even if we don't terminate it, it may mean that a lot of the work done will have to be done all over again and so forth. So it's important to understand what assumptions we make and to keep testing them as we go to make sure that they are still valid. I will not spend much time on the next slide because you've already seen it in the previous presentation. The third slide here essentially puts the framework of how assumptions and knowledge fit into decisions. You know, as you can see, there are things we know and things we assume. The combination of our assumptions and our knowledge lead to our understanding and definition of what we need to do. Based on that, we select methods, determine opportunities, make decisions, take actions, and all of that produce outcomes. And then when we evaluate the outcomes, we determine whether we can do things better, whether we can make decisions in a different way, and in fact whether we know more in terms of knowledge or our ability to make the right assumption. A general framework which applies to any decision-making situation. So, again, I'll skip the next slide. We've already seen it. So let's talk about assumptions. And I have a checklist here about assumptions. So as we start a project, let's first start with thinking about all the assumptions that we have made. And there are essentially two kinds. There are so-called internal assumptions, which deal with the thing that we can control, and external assumptions, which are those that are beyond our control. And then for all of those, there is a range of variation. When there is a wide range, that means that there is a high uncertainty attached to them. When there is a narrow range, it means that we have a high confidence. We then, and that's the most important step, we then need to determine among all the assumptions which ones are critical. And a critical assumption is an assumption that can have a significant impact on the project. And I list 5 criteria that are important to look at, and any assumptions that meet one or more of those criteria can be determined as being critical. One, it's a make or break assumption. If the assumption is wrong, the project will fail or become irrelevant, and therefore we will need to stop the work. Number 2, an assumption that affects many elements of the project, meaning that, you know, again, if it's wrong or if it needs to be changed, many things that have already been done will have to be redone. Third one are the assumptions that have the greatest effect on key outcomes. Again, if it's wrong or if it needs to be changed, the outcome may be quite different. Fourth are assumptions that trigger significant investment commitment, significant financial decisions. You know, we may have to launch an expensive survey or build a new facility or what have you. And then the fifth one are the assumptions where a small deviation or a small change can have huge impact. To give you an example, if you are involved in foreign trade, sometimes a very small variation in exchange rate can make the difference between whether an export project is viable or not. So these are this is the important step. Among all the assumptions, find a very small number. There shouldn't be more than a handful that you can call really critical, and those need to be checked and monitored and revisited regularly. So in your project reviews, you want to tie those reviews to assumption testing, or you want to tie assumption testing to project review. You want to link the assumptions to the checkpoint for you. What I call the checkpoint is the project review times. There has to be, for each of the critical assumptions you have determined, you have to determine when in the course of the project they need to be checked. Sometimes every, very regularly, maybe every week, sometimes, less frequently. And so that way, the rhythm of your project is tied to the need to verify, monitor, and check the assumptions. And then you can put together a table such as the one on the next slide, where you can see we list the critical assumptions on the left, the checkpoints, which are the project review times, across the top, and then we say, assumption 1, we'll check it in the first 2 because it's maybe very important to know very early on whether it's valid or not, and so on and so forth. So that's a kind of a ledger that allows you to keep track of whether your assumptions are still valid as you move forward. I've also included in the material on the course site a template that you can use to set up your assumption testing. It's a little more elaborate than this one because I also identify who is responsible, but it's a tool you can use if you find it useful. Okay? All right. Thank you.